Thorfinn Karlsefne's return was overdue from his spring exploration. He had spent a week examining wheat fields and vineyards in the vicinity. By the time he and his men arrived, the momentous day had transitioned from twilight to moonlight, casting a frosty silver glow upon the forest. As they walked along the line of booths, the last booth illuminated the path, accompanied by faint notes of revelry. Thorfinn spoke light-heartedly to Snorri of Iceland, his partner. "We seem to have missed great happenings. If the light was good enough, we might find heads and limbs like pebbles scattered over the plain." Snorri laughed. "This moonlight plays tricks on the mind," he replied. "As you spoke, I could have sworn I saw an arm down there." He nodded towards the ravine by which they were walking, and old Grimkel behind him followed his gaze and grunted. "I see what you mean, yonder where the moon shines. It has the look of an arm." Thorfinn looked down at the black pool of shadow where something like a snag caught his attention. The moonlight gave it the eerie appearance of a hand with outstretched fingers. He stopped and grasped a bush on the brink before lowering himself over the edge with his staff. As he drew closer, he used the staff to remove layers of sodden pine branches before looking again. He realized that the snag was an arm outstretched from a prone body lying face down in the brush. Shaken, he cried out from the shadow, "It is a Skraeling who has been murdered! Bring torches!" The men waited for the lights, looking at each other and the snag-like arm. The heavy toll of Thorfinn's voice broke the silence, interpreting their thoughts. "I am uncertain of the individual responsible for this act, yet I am aware that in killing this one man, he has ended the lives of more men than human language can count. If the Skraelings reappear, they will not be friendly but violent, and we will be in a position to react aggressively to preserve our lives. This cycle will continue for countless unborn generations, and the white face I worked so hard to portray as a symbol of friendship will be synonymous with warfare in the eyes of these savage people." With a voice full of rage, he proclaimed, "Observe how the foolishness of a single man can undo the wisdom of many." Without daring to speak, they stood silently waiting for the torches to be brought forward. But once the lights had been procured and handed to them, they couldn't help but exclaim, "The Skraeling must be the one who provided the bear's coat." "By Odin," a fifth person exclaimed, "I spotted him moving in this direction just before the scream. He must have plunged over the ridge and laid beneath the snow as it fell." Hjalmar Thickskull attempted to discover where the cover had gone. Nevertheless, his memory reminded him that the leading hide remained in the possession of the late, unfortunate individual. Just before he was slain, Grimkel intervened hastily. "They must have bought it." However, the lawman grabbed the torch out of his hand and held it over each brownish-colored hand in rotation. "No ring encrusted with a red gem is on any of the fingers," he stated. Hjalmar revealed an exclamation while holding the other torch. "This is what destroyed him." All of them crowded together, peering intently at the small object, and upon inspection were overcome with shock. The thick-skulled man expressed his amazement. "I've heard it said many times that people suppose Brand the Red provided the Skraeling with a tool in exchange for the skin, yet no one speculated that the tool had been provided in this manner." Chapter 14. Showing how disgrace came upon Alrek the Chief. It was as if all the woes of Vinland had gathered around the dark heap in the ravine, and all the joys were gathered around the champion's hospitable fire. Made of juniper faggots, whose sweetness blended with the fragrance of the pine branches carpeting the floor, it filled the air with the spicy aroma of Yuletide, and Yuletide merriment was on the lengthy tables on either side of the hearth, and Yuletide mirth was on the faces above the board. Every flicker of the flames revealed a new treasure of claw or hide or antler, and at each admiring tribute from their guests, the champions' hearts swelled with pride, so that they were obliged to relieve the pressure by echoing at the top of their lungs the song Rene was singing to chords from a homemade harp. The lone flaw in their content was that Karlsefne was not there to witness their splendor. When a commotion among the dogs outside declared the arrival of a visitor, they left everything to fix eager eyes on the opening door. The form that strode in out of the moonlight was Karlsefne's, accompanied by Snorri of Iceland. However, the cheer they had imagined to expend in hails went out in gasps as the flickering firelight revealed his face. Halting shortly within the doorway, he stood clutching his silver-shod staff in both hands before him, like a bar obstructing his fury. From the high seat, the young chief greeted him with a concerned expression. "We extend our welcome, Karlsefne, and consider it an honor that you have arrived. I trust your journey has been according to your liking, and that nothing has occurred that you find unfavorable." He gestured to Erland, in his feast clothes of blue and silver, to serve as the master of ceremonies and guide the distinguished guest to the seat set aside for him. The lawman did not seem to acknowledge the invitation. "I am grateful for your reception," he stated, "but I will not conceal from you that something has arisen. Before this feast continues, I want to pose some inquiries to your men." Alrek darted a quick look at his companion guard, sensing trouble was brewing. Guard's face had the darkening quality of a storm cloud, while Brand's was aflame with excitement. Alrek could see the uncertainty in the young chief's eyes, but he spoke steadily nonetheless. "You are in charge here in Vinland, Karlsefne, and you have the final say on everything. But before you proceed, won't you take the seat of honor first?" Without hesitation, the lawman cut him short. "I won't accept any hospitality until this matter is resolved," he replied firmly. Then he turned to Gard and asked, "Gard Elderson, I want to know what you paid the Skraeling for the skin on the high seat." Gard muttered his response, as he had done before without looking up. "I gave him a piece of red fabric and a ring with a red gem. He liked the ring so much that he put it on his finger as soon as he got it." Karlsefne was holding his staff tightly, and it broke under the pressure as he spoke. "You claim he wore the ring today," he said, before Brand got up noisily, pushing his cup and plate away. "If what you're trying to say is that you met the Skraeling, and you saw a knife instead of a ring on his hand," Brand said, "let me save you the trouble by telling you that I traded the weapon with him myself. Gard is lying about the skin, and when he saw what I did, he made up the ring story to avoid getting into trouble. I didn't have to thank him for it, as I stand behind whatever I do. I just kept quiet because I didn't want to implicate him. But now I'm not holding back, and you can do what you want once my leader is done with me." Brand shot Alrek a cheeky look, grinning at the response he received. However, before Alrek could reply, Karlsefne intervened. "Are you suggesting that your leader didn't know about this?" The Red One confidently shook his long hair, relishing the excitement of the moment. "He wasn't much different from the bench before you," he replied. "He had intended to bargain for the skin, but he slipped on the ice and lost his bearings, not even hearing the shouts or realizing he ended up in the booth, with the fur right in front of him." Karlsefne interrupted. "Did you retrieve the fur and place it in the booth?" Gard anticipated Brand's response. "It was actually me who did that. I saw Brand drop the skin and follow the wild men's commotion, so I picked it up and brought it to the booth. When I returned, Alrek was already there and asked where he had been. He began to address the high seat with an apologetic tone, but was interrupted by Snorri of Iceland's mocking laughter. "I swear on Lok, I have dealt with men from France, England, and all those nearby, and never witnessed such a swarm of falsehoods." Karlsefne responded, "They are like driftwood, appearing smooth and healthy, but inside they're rotten to the core." His held-back fury shook his massive frame and reverberated through his deep voice. "Yet we must remember that these two lied to protect their comrade. Only Alrek Ingolfsson lied for himself." Alrek the chief attempted to speak, but Karlsefne raised his hand in objection. "Let me make it clear that I'm not trying to provoke you further into lying. I openly state that I know you were the one who killed the Skraeling." "Slew?" repeated Alrek's sword-bearer, and in unison the champions shouted, "Slew!" They then dispersed into separate cries. It was his death cry. They saw it as a warning. The next time they come it will be in full war regalia. Brand struck the table with his fist, exclaiming, "I now know who committed the murder. It was Thorhald the huntsman. He desired the cessation of trade with the Skraelings and wanted to incite discontent among the camp." The Iceland chief interjected, "Your tongue moves faster than your mind. The huntsman spent the trading day with me setting traps far north in the woods." Brand continued to accuse, "Then it must have been Allé the Greedy or Fat Fast." However, the Greenland guests refuted. Fast was out fishing with me all day, and I myself witnessed Allé in the group in front of the lawman's door. The Red One stood helpless, and Gard claimed, "It was I, not Alrek, who brought the skin into the booth. I swear on my honor it's the truth." The lawman countered, this time, while Karlsefne scolded, "Your word carries no weight if your honor is tarnished. You can't have it both ways." Finally the lawman turns to Alrek, saying, "Show the boldness that you inherited. Confess and submit to me." Alrek proudly gazed back as their eyes met like crossing swords. "I may be at your mercy, but I refuse to concede," Alrek declared. "May the noose take my body if I had any knowledge of the matter until it was revealed to me by your own lips. I further claim that it is unjust to accuse me merely because others have deceived, and because it appears as though I am the one responsible for bringing the spoils here." This remark was certainly bold. Karlsefni threw his broken staff away and lunged forward, causing the veins on his forehead to bulge and turn white against purple. "This case has yet to be fully examined," he asserted. "I have not mentioned that these are my sole reasons. Here is another piece of evidence, which I personally retrieved from the head of the Skryling. It was lodged in so deeply that not even his fall down the bank could free it." He withdrew the stone hatchet from his belt, which was discoloured with dark stains where he had struck. For Alric of Norway, it was as if it was magic. His mouth opened, and he fell backwards into the high seat. "My hatchet!" he breathed. Then Karlsefni released a bolt of lightning from his eyes. "Do not provoke me any further, or I might forget that I am a lawman and kill you on the spot. Remember that I too am of Viking lineage. Do not tempt me. Step down from the seat you have no right to be in. Take off the cloak that you have disgraced with your unmanliness. Remove the sword that you are unfit to bear." It was as if a tiger had been stirred up by a punch of Viking blood in Ingolf's son. He suddenly stood up straight, shouted inarticulately, and crossed the fire with his sword already drawn, catching everyone off guard. However, Karlsefni remained unwavering in his might. He did not step back or budge, nor did the blaze in his eyes weaken or falter. For a moment the boy's gaze wavered, and he stopped in his tracks. Karlsefni's voice roared like thunder. "I am the supreme leader in Vinland." The limits of the body failed, however. The rigorously trained mind obeyed. Alric slowly raised his trembling hands, undoing the clasp on his shoulder. The fabric fell with a hushed whisper, pooling around his feet like a macabre display. With deliberate slowness, he shifted his grip on his weapon and extended it as it had never been extended before, hilt forward. The lawman received the weapon, finishing his sentence in an eerie stillness. "From now on, you will wear no soldierly garb and carry no more weaponry than the untamed beasts you resemble. You, champions of Vinland, must find another leader." Urging Snorri to open the door, he departed the booth with the Icelander in tow. The revellers stood spellbound, transfixed in silence and stasis, until Brand prostrated himself at Ingolf's feet, pressing one of his own knives into the Viking's brown hand. "You foresaw that you would one day end my life," he whispered, baring his chest for the killing stroke. Those who dared glimpse the expression in the Viking's eyes believed he would follow through. His fingers began to close around the knife, only to relinquish it with sudden force, throwing its owner back. "Stay away!" he hissed, warding off Brand and the others with outstretched arms. He slunk past them through the door, swallowed into the night. Chapter 15. About the fire that runs on the waves. At the intersection of the sprawling Vinland Bay and the meandering river that disappeared deep into the forest, the Vinland champions laboured. The once still woods now echoed with the youthful voices of the invaders, and the ancient trees succumbed to the greed of their hands, much like the old-world cities were falling before the might of the young North. The group sweated under the June sun, struggling to float a large log down the stream to the building place. Nearby, others sawed off the green crowns from the fallen monarchs. The song of axes echoed in the forest, telling of progress in conquests. As the final task came into focus, the choppers spoke of the ship as a completed vessel, waiting only for the finishing touches. "We need red paint for the hull," said one. "As long as we get gilding for the dragon's head, I do not care," added another. "The dragon's head will be a weapon in itself. I expect the wild men will run at the sight of it. There will not be another ship like this one." Brand paused from his axe, swinging to survey his surroundings, his eyes stealing in impatience. "If ever it is done," he muttered, "at this rate, it is the summer that will be finished first. If we had worked as we should have done, it would be completed now." Ketil the glib chuckled. "Then why did you not work as you should have done?" And Erlend interrupted. "You ought not to complain. Every time I told you to work on it, you preferred to go hunting or even help with Karlsefni's fence." "What difference does it make what I like?" countered the fiery-haired Brand. "You are the chief. It is your duty to ensure that the work is done as necessary." Erlend grappled with the question, his chubby fingers kneading his flesh, but he found no answer. Brand had resumed his chopping, the sound of his striking ringing through the underbrush, nearly connecting with the figure who had just appeared from the forest. The man barked a warning, causing Brand to pause before he delivered the final blow. "It is advised that you be more aware of your surroundings," growled the man, a familiar voice to both Erlend and Brand. Brand replied with a hint of defiance, "Why do you sneak up like a cat if you have nothing to risk?" He continued his work, swinging the axe with force. Thorhall the huntsman, however, did not dismiss them contemptuously as he usually did. Standing amidst the trees, he regarded the group, a curiosity in his gaze. When he had composed himself from dodging Bran's axe, he spoke. "My excuse is that if the leaves were not rustling beneath my feet, I would have missed hearing the news of great interest. Will you tell me about the ship?" Gard the Ugly grumbled. "How does that concern you?" Erlend lowered his axe, happy to have someone new to share their plans with. Feigning that his blade required sharpening, he drew out a stone to sharpen it. As he worked, he explained that the ship would be extensive, with a forward deck to shield the provisions, but no frivolous cabin. The mast would come from a tall pine nearby, and Gudrid, Karlsefne's wife, would weave the sail, or at least they would ask her. The colors would likely be red and yellow, and the name would be The Fire That Runs on the Waves. The story sounded impressive as he recounted it. Bran's axe also fell silent, and Kettle and Harold and half a dozen more crept closer, listening with a burning passion that now and then shot triumphant glances at the huntsman. It was something of a victory to command the attention of one who was usually so conceited. When the recounting was complete, Thorhall was lavish with praise. "You are indeed the most energetic of youths. Where is it you plan to journey when the fire is completed?" Gard delivered a resounding blow to his tree, the only one still working. "How does that concern you?" he demanded harshly. "You will not be invited to take the steering oar. It is impolite to insult a man who is complimenting you." 8 glances glared at the Ugly One while Erlend gently rebuked him. "What is the need for such talk?" he asked him. Then, speaking to the huntsman, "If the ship is completed before summer, we will fight the Skrallings. It is fortuitous that there is enmity between us. Otherwise I do not know whom we could fight. Since it is ill-advised to do what we want and fight Karlsefne," Brand added maliciously, and there was a chorus of agreement. The huntsman's eyes, trained to find prey in the darkest night, scanned the young faces. "Now that is a strange way to speak of the lawman," he remarked. Responses sprang up in his face like a flock of birds. "How else do you expect us to speak? After the way he treated Alrek Ingolfsson, I think he deserves worse words. To my core I hate him." Pushing aside the sapling screen, the huntsman emerged and seated himself on a fallen tree, as though the landscape were worthy of his attention. "Yet it is a foolish way after all," he began, "for only see how Alrek's misfortune has been Erlend's good luck." The amiable one's handsome brown face reddened. "We have given no thanks for that, nor will we," he answered hastily. "I have seen Alrek only once since the day he met with misfortune, and then I was afraid to speak with him. But the first opportunity I have, I will return the chiefdom to him." The murmuring that followed was almost a cheer, and only Thorhall made a sound of dissent. "Now you act more like boys than men," he said. "You may pity Alrek Ingolfsson if you so choose, but in doing so, you should not underestimate the leader that you have." "Now what trap are you setting?" grumbled Gard, even as Erlend interrupted. "I implore you to disregard that, and instead offer us your wisdom on how to find the Skrallings. You, better than any other, know the secrets of the southern country." Some of the band drew breath rather quickly as their chief said that, and looked to see the huntsman rise in offence. But again he surprised them. Recrossing his legs and settling his broad back against a stump, he did nothing worse than to sit gazing away at the sunshine of the open. His voice was still amiable when at last he spoke. "It would be useless to deny that many wonders may be told of the southern country. I will begin by sharing that it contains bigger game than Skrallings and—" His hand strayed to the deerskin cord looping his neck and ending in the breast of his stained green tunic, "and more valuable things than furs." He paused to cough, and no one moved for fear of breaking the spell. He recovered himself with a covert smile. "It may be that I will even do better than sharing. What should you say if I reveal to you the paths that lead to the treasure? I have thought of heading south myself this summer." Gard answered with an unexpectedness that made them jump. "I should say that we were rabbit-brained if we allowed you to lead us anywhere. Because Erlend is caught with your nonsense, it is not proved that you can deceive us all. I would not follow you apace. To your face, I tell you that I believe it was your hand that killed the Skralling, though your body was further off than could be seen by a raven hovering in the sky." He broke off and began making rune signs with his fingers, as the small eyes turned toward him. But it was not the huntsman's anger that he had to contend with. Rather it was the resentment of those who feared to lose a tidbit from their watering mouths. "Hold your tongue! You know that is an old woman's tale. For what reason should you interfere? You are not all of us, the mouths snarled, while the elbows belonging to them made themselves felt admonishingly in his ribs. Erlend spoke with unprecedented severity. You have no right to show hostility toward a man who is behaving well toward you. You may choose either to go off by yourself or else sit down and keep quiet like the rest of us. 9 times out of 10, Gard would have subsided in sulky submission, but this was the 10th time. As he approached the bush where his equipment hung, the huntsman caught a glimpse of fear in his eyes, which quickly turned into a look of malice towards his supposed companion. I prefer to choose only the best company, he declared, grabbing his gear and tossing his axe over his shoulder before slouching away. The workers in the clearing wisely refrained from speaking to him, noticing the scowl on his dusky face. Even those toiling on the river bank readily concurred when he grumbled, with feigned politeness, that the heat was unbearable. Indeed, it was easier to agree than to argue. The sun beat down ferociously on the blue water and the green land, making it hard to find any respite from the heat. Even after fording the river and crossing the treeless fields where Karlsefne's cattle grazed in the shallow pools, the Ugly One's linen clothes were still wet on his skin. He discarded his vague plan to fish, and instead resolved to visit the area where the red berries grew, believing there would be fewer chances for his mind to dry up. Traversing the grove, he made his way to the campsite where he planned to unload his burden. However, the camp was not as accessible as it once was. A towering fence made of logs with sharp, pointed ends had been erected around the 12 huts, and 3 guards stood watch at each of the gates. Even so, the Ugly One found the guard on duty to be far too strict for his liking. Strong Domar, who held the post, delighted in barring his spear until the newcomer had answered a series of questions about his age and breakfast food. By the time the Ugly One was finally allowed to enter, he had lost his patience with the overly exuberant guard. Shooing away a group of playful dogs, he stomped across the clover-dotted grass and into the booth. Once inside, he spotted Alrek the Exile, who seemed almost as much a part of another world as Halad. The wiry figure was rifling through his cherished chest, still preserved from his prosperous days. He had anticipated the booth's vacancy at this time of day since he paid no attention to the sounds around him. He neither heard nor saw his companion stop in the doorway, staring at him. Gard thought that he had never before witnessed such a transformation in another person. From the dishevelled brown hair to the frayed black cloak that enveloped him to his heels, the man appeared as different as November is to June. His face displayed the most striking alteration. His cheeks no longer held a crimson hue, while his eyes were like ashes in a flame that had diminished. A raspy sob escaped Gard's lips as he knelt before the man who had once followed him, holding his ragged cloak. "Alrek, come back, and let me atone for my actions. I cannot sleep at night, thinking of the suffering I caused you. I implore you to return." After gazing down at Gard, Alrek spoke through gritted teeth. "Are you still grasping to spend your money without consequence? You cannot bear the burden of your deeds. However, when you killed him, you knew that you would not be the only one to suffer. I did not kill him, I did not. I only uttered a falsehood. You spoke untruthfully, and I repeated your words. I would not believe you, even if you swore upon the boar's head. You attempted to take Bran's weapon, and the Skraeling fought against you. You struck him with my hatchet, which you had found where it dropped when I fell. No matter your oath on the cross, I would not have believed you. Release my cloak and depart from me. If you possessed even a modicum of intelligence, you would not speak of atoning for your actions. You would recognize that I am forever shamed. Quickly, release my cloak before I throw you like a dog." Freed, Alrek left. Gard made it to the doorway in time to see him exit the gate, saluted by Domar, then swallowed up once more by the forest's silent guard. Standing tall with his hands firmly at his waist, the unattractive individual pressed himself against the wall and spoke with a weighty tone to the hound who had woken up from its nap just to come and cuddle with him. "It is possible that we aren't as cultured as he suggests, Fafnir. Nevertheless, we remain loyal, regardless of what he has to say. We don't hold it against a companion if they mistreat us." Noticing the hairs on the hound's back suddenly standing on end, he looked up to see Thorhall the hunter walking swiftly through the fields. He concluded with a noise strikingly similar to the one emerging from the dog's enormous throat. "And the two of us are skilled at recognizing an enemy when we encounter one." Chapter 16. Proving that Alrek's empty hands were full of power. Gudrid remarked, "A sail is a considerable burden," while cautioning Erlend not to disturb her sleeping child. The infant had been crying, and upon investigation she found Roswitha had abandoned him. Gudrid had to improvise a harness to keep him content. She suggested they move the discussion outside to the courtyard where the families gathered after dinner. The area was surrounded by a stockade, but the gates were kept open. 3 guards watched the gates, but they were carefree and enjoyed trading quips with the other men who were drinking Vinland grape juice. The mood was mellow and relaxed. The fires were dying, and the moon had just risen in the sky. Gudrid noted the enchanting evening and how it might influence her decision before agreeing to hear Brand and Erlend's plea. She held onto their sleeves while they pleaded their request for her to fabricate a sail for their ship, indicating that she was known for weaving and that it would not take her much time. Erlend continued to be pleasant while Brand was more reserved. They had hoped Alrek could have been their advocate, but it was understood that personal trials prevented his involvement. Gudrid's typically serene expression was replaced with a furrowed brow. "Oh dear," she sighed, "if only there were something I could do to help my kinsman. Even the child longs for him. Every time he hears footsteps resembling Alrek's, he turns his gaze towards the door. When it isn't his kinsman who walks in, he cries." The trio remained silent as they walked, Erlend lost in thought and Brand angrily destroying lucky clovers beneath his feet. Eventually, Gudrid decided to stop. "I need to speak with Jorund, Sigurd's wife," she said. "I can't promise I'll be able to weave for you just yet. I have to see how my dairy work goes first. Best of luck with your ventures in the meantime." "That's good enough for me," Erlend replied, smiling. "If you truly wish us luck, you'll help us in any way you can." The group left, thrilled to share the news with their companions. Meanwhile, Gudrid contemplated whether to speak to Jorund about a cheese matter or join Karlsefne and his chiefs as they studied a map. She reached up to touch her amber necklace, only to find it missing. She scoffed to herself. "Karlsefne will tease me endlessly. He always said this would happen if I allowed Snorri to play with it. I recall it was near the river where I sat with him earlier today." I presented it to him to nibble on, but as he reached out for Bjorn's boat that glided past, my morsel slipped from his grasp. Bjorn beckoned me to join him, and in my distraction, I failed to retrieve the lost treat. Oh, what a silly blunder. However, I deduced the exact location and contemplated slipping away unnoticed to recover it. Venturing toward the western gateway, she surveyed the gleaming riverbank. The area between her and the small hill featured no more than a dozen trees, and the moon's light offered such radiance it was almost day. With prompt resolve, she gathered up her trailing outfit and said, "Any skrelling small enough to hide in those shadows is not big enough to be afraid of." Then, with a strong and speedy step, she quickly exited. She appeared to neglect any other creatures that might lurk within the shadows. Reaching the edge, she marveled at the resplendent river, then shifted her gaze toward the roots of a nearby tree. Gazing up into its branches never occurred to her. However, 10 steps away, Death perched on a branch, a tawny body with fiery eyes and a serpent-like tail, silently whipping the air as it poised for a leap. From the shadows, a familiar voice shouted sharply, "Lie down on your face!" The tragedy ensued mere moments after the cry. As she flung herself forward, something vaulted over her and collided with another object in mid-air. The heavy bodies struck the ground, twigs crackling, and the tranquil stillness shattered by a terrible cacophony of growling and heaving gasps. She struggled to climb the trunk, but the adversaries battled on the hem of her robes, pinning her down. One fleeting glance out of the corner of her eye allowed her to behold the enormous feline atop its back, grasping the boy who knelt on its lashing body with nothing but his bare brown hands to fend off its gaping maw.